brisk, chilly. Good morning to all of our viewers around the world. Good afternoon and good evening to those of you over in Europe as well, as we have stop number 2 underway now on the FIBT World Cup Bobsled and Skeleton Circuit. We're in Park City, Utah, about 30 miles from downtown Salt Lake City for the men's skeleton competition, run number 1, coming up just moments away. Hello once again, everyone. I'm Tim Singer, pleased to be joined by 2001 Skeleton World Cup champion Lincoln DeWitt. Lincoln, as we check out this camera making its way down the track, tell us some of the speed, some of the challenges that face you guys when you hit the Park City track.
Well, it's a very high-speed track. It gets up to top speed by about the halfway point. So it's a fast track. It's a fairly subtle track. It's not a real dangerous track. It's a matter of subtly finding your way down and not doing any more work than you have to with the sled.
Alexander Tretiakov of Russia has the start record and making their way down the bottom. They call this one of the fastest tracks in the world.
Yep, I believe it's the second fastest track after the new track in Whistler.
The lower portions, a lot of tight curves, a couple of uphill sections here. The Olympic curve down at the bottom, then they make their way up to the finish line.
Yep, the finish section there is all uphill. The last curve's uphill, and any hits there along the walls will really cost you a lot of time. And
an old competitor of yours, Martin Rettel, now coaching for the Austrians, has a very long, relatively speaking, track record now, 12 plus years he's held that mark. So we're moments away from the start. Start list coming up as we have all told 27 athletes on hand, led by Martins Dukurs. The World Cup standings, they reflect last week's performances. Dukurs and Tretiakov certainly appear to be the favorites once again. As we get to our start list as well, I'll tell you that we're interactive as always in the first heat. You can email us at bobskellytv@gmail.com, BOBSKELETV@gmail.com. Also accepting your tweets. We're at BobskellyTV. Again, the spelling BOBSKELETV, BobskellyTV, at BobskellyTV. As you see the temperature, and Lincoln, that plays no small factor in this sport. I mean, you guys are winter athletes, but this is a little extreme.
It is. You know, minus 15 is cold under any conditions, but then you factor in 80 miles an hour worth of wind chill, and it's really cold.
John Fairburn of Canada will lead things off. Keep an eye on that number 3 position. Dom Parsons is really making some noise in the early going in this young season. The Dukurs brothers 8 and 9. Rarely is there a race when they're not in the top 5. As for the Americans and the British and the other Canadians, you see them littered around. They had mixed results last week. 3 Canadians in the top 10. The top American last week was Matt Antoine in 7th place. Ed Smith had a rather tough day in Calgary at the World Cup opener. So sit back, get set for some skeleton action. We have a lot of sliding for you today. Those of you who are going to hang tough with us, we have men's skeleton, women's bobsled, and 2-man bobsled on this busy day of activity here in Park City. John Fairburn of Canada leading things off. Start record, as we said, was a 4:49. This is well off the pace. It will be interesting to see, though, if Tretiakov and Dukurs can match that start record.
Fairburn's going to have to drive really well to make up for a solid start, but not one that would normally put him in the top couple on this track.
I know ice-wise that number 1 spot in the lineup is a desirable position. How about nerves-wise?
Yeah, for me, I'd like to get off early too. You know, just get things going, get started. John's having a pretty clean run down here. Couple little corrections. Looks like he may see how he comes out here at the low point. Critical spot. A little brush on the right wall. Won't cost him too much time there. Not a perfect run, but a solid run for John.
80.1 miles an hour at the fast mark. That's actually faster speeds by far than we saw last week in Calgary. As you see, the first heat, a time of 49.01 in this 2-heat combined time competition.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here and predict that we will see a new track record here today.
I like this. Your debut as a broadcaster, and you're going right there.
I'm going right there. And I do think it is the oldest track record still out there.
2001. Yeah, I believe you're right. There may be some older start records, or at least in bobsled. Yeah, in skeleton, that probably is. Martin Rettel, and we'll see him alongside the track today. First sled down, John Fairburn of Canada with the 478 start and the 49.01. We're all pacing ourselves today. I think I counted we're going to have something like 400 sleds coming down this track. And it's supposed to warm up to a balmy 11 degrees Fahrenheit at some point as we get set now for Alex Gassner, 8th place last week for the German in the World Cup opener in Calgary.
It's a very similar start. The first 3 curves here in Park City are all pretty subtle. It's just a matter of trying to get through the first part of the track without driving any more than you have to. The first real critical turn is coming up here, turn 5, set you up for the big turn 6.
Throughout the racing, you'll see the green turn to red, and that will mean that the sled on the ice has fallen behind the current leader. But this is very tight, only 100th of a second. Falling the 700s back. You hear the skidding. That's either generally the face mask or the feet.
You saw right there a couple of little skids at low point. That's going to cost them some more time, especially on this hard ice today. We have to be looking out for people who are having a little bit of sideways skidding.
Hate to belabor the story, but it is the story, at least in the early morning with the temperature. You stay warm and you try to get out there as late as possible. You're in this thin little suit.
Yeah, it's, you know, I found that once you get going on the track, you don't notice it anymore. No matter how cold it is, you don't notice it.
That's a great point. I mean, what really amazes me is you see some correction happening there by the German.
There's some skidding and a couple of hits there. That's probably why he's 3/10 back after that run.
All right, all eyes to the top. Dom Parsons finished 3rd last week in Calgary, but more importantly, last year when he was still competing in the minor Intercontinental Cup circuit, Parsons won the race here in Park City. I talked to him. He feels very confident about his chances of repeating a medal again today.
See the start time, 4:70. It's solid. I don't think that's going to be a start time to quite put him in with the medal contenders. A little early on to that turn, so it's going to set him up for a bad 4. He's having a tough time here on the top of the track. See how he does with 6. He's got it back together here, but I think he probably lost a little bit of time up at the top.
And he falls back into the red here compared to the Canadian 300s. Let's see if he can open it up. Is this a track where you can reverse the trend? Some you can't.
No, most of the speed is gained at the top, both from the start and the steep section of the track at the top. So it's hard if you fall behind in the first half. It's hard to make it up at the bottom. And there's a hit at low point. Not too much of a skid though.
No, disappointing run when so much was expected after the performance last week in Calgary. 28 seconds. Not 20. That would be
disappointing.
28/100ths of a second off the pace. 3rd out of 3 for Dom Parsons. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here at the top. You know, the speed's all at the bottom and the excitement's at the bottom, but races are won or lost in the first few curves, especially in Park City.
It's first off the start, and then the top 5 or 6 turns is where the steepest part of the track is, and that's where you get up to speed, and then it's a matter of trying to maintain it through the bottom half of the track. You know, I don't think he's going to be happy with that result, but he's pretty new to the World Cup Tour, and I think we'll see a lot more from him in the future as he gets a little more experience and gets a little more comfortable.
Dave Greshison, one of 3 Canadians to finish in the top 3 on their home track last week in Calgary. He was in 6th place, start time of 4:81.
Fairly clean at the top, but that start time of 4:81 is going to be a handicap for him. It's going to be a little late going into turn 6, may cause him trouble on the exit.
Last week was his debut in the World Cup, so a top 6 is certainly a great result.
You can hear the scratching noise there, sort of plastic on ice. It's either the helmet or the tips of the shoes touching on the ice.
The idea, of course, as he crosses the finish line in 4th place is to be as close, to have that head as close to the ice as possible without touching.
Without touching, right. Sometimes you get it a little bit low, and then the G-forces in the turns also are pushing down on your head really hard, so that sometimes will push the athletes' helmets into the sled in the high G, or into the ice in the high G turns.
As we check the replay, talk about the challenge of trying to literally see the track when you're trying to keep your head down. And it's got to play havoc on the neck.
You know, you're trying to keep your head as low as possible, which means you don't get to see very far ahead. So you have the track memorized, and also you're doing a lot of judging of where you are in the track by peripheral vision and the sides rather than looking forward.
The steam amidst the Canadian competitor, the third of 3 Canadians, Eric Nielsen, 32 years old, originally from Kelowna, British Columbia, now makes his home in Calgary.
And relax on the sled.
He had some challenges in training this week. Let's see if he can pull it together on race day.
Start time of 4:82 for Nielsen.
You know, this track puts a premium on good starts, and that's sort of a mid-pack start time. Dragging his toes to make a little quick steering correction there. Ideally, you want to steer pressing on the sled with your knees and your shoulders, but if you need to make a quick steering change, use your toes.
United States, Germany, Latvia, Russia, probably among the top nations now, but historically over the last decade or so, Canada has really been the country.
Really high there. Had trouble with turn 13, and not surprisingly then with 14 and a couple of skids and a hit at low point.
In the end, he has a 2nd place finish time, 2600ths back of his teammate, Fairburn. 1-2 right now for Canada through the first 5 competitors, halfway through the first seat. The saying, you remember the 2006 Olympics, Canada 1-2-4, just a couple of hundredths away from sweeping the medals.
Yeah, there he is very high at the exit of the turn, which is going to send him across into 14 on a little bit of an early line, which means he got on the turn a little bit too soon.
Lovely. 1-2 for Canada. Here's the first competitor for the United States coming up in just a moment from Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. It's 28-year-old Matt Antoine. Big competitor, 6'3", 185. Antoine began in the sport in 2003. In his first World Cup season, 2009, he won a bronze medal on the Olympic track in Whistler, his very first World Cup there.
Let's see what Matt can get first start here. It's interesting, skeleton definitely favors athletes who are a little bit more aerodynamic, built more like distance runners than sprinters. Height does not seem to be a big factor. I've seen good success from tall and short athletes.
Despite a slower start than the leader, he has taken over the lead by negotiating those upper curves very well.
Matt knows the track well. We had U.S. team trials here earlier in November, and Matt did very well there, so he's had some good runs here this year already.
700ths from one split to the next. Really no big problems, especially down here where a lot of sleds are veering.
No skid there, a little offline, but no skid is the most important thing there.
Losing just 100th on the last few curves. This could be a medal-winning run. 600ths up the lead, still with some very good 3 of the next 4 remaining. All could also contend for the medals. The two-handed versus the one-handed start. It was a mixed bag when you were competing. Now virtually everyone with the one-handed.
I think there's only 1 or 2 athletes out there anymore using, at this level, using the two-handed push, which just means having both hands on the sled when you're running. The Canadians, actually in the 2002 Olympic year, sort of came out with the one-handed push.
Right.
And it's, over the next few years, it pretty much taken over everywhere. It seems to be, depends on the athlete, but it seems to be probably about 1/10 of a second faster at the start.
Hirotsu Takahashi finished 10th at the World Cup opener last week in Calgary. Japanese athletes have been getting better starts over the last few years. Impressive to see. As we see a start list, 483.
When we see the top guys, they'll be going, a lot of them in the 460s and some in the 450s and maybe below.
If I'm not mistaken, back in 2001, when you won your World Cup title, it was by a mere point or two over a Japanese competitor.
Yep, over Koshi, who's here coaching the Japanese sliders now.
It was a race here that decided it?
It was a race here that decided it, and it was all decided by just a couple of points. One spot different by either of us in that race and would have changed the final result.
One of the more exciting World Cup finishes ever. Skidding his way down here at the bottom, not a great run.
No, and using his toes a lot, which means he's making last-second adjustments rather than sort of anticipating what he needs to do.
Still Lincoln, a great time. 49.27, good enough for third place, a tie for third place with Eric Nielsen right now.
Pretty tight grouping there, though. They've got 4 or 5 athletes all within a couple hundreds, which is not unusual on this track.
The start wasn't the fastest, and there were some mistakes, so could this be the setup of the sled?
It could be. I'm not sure what equipment
there's Koshi.
There's Koshi, Coach Koshi now. I don't know what equipment the Japanese are using right now.
Okay, the American, Matt Antoine leading the way, but now the big kids have gotten out of school. That's what we used to say when we played touch football, and then the big kids got out of school, and we lost our starting positions.
Well, here's Martin's Dukurs. Pretty much dominated the sport the last 4 years. He's been sliding for over 10 years on the World Cup.
4:61 start time, well off the 4:49 record. But this is a man that not only dominates the sport, he has probably dominated sport unlike anyone in any sport the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that'll probably be one of the top 5 start times we'll see today. So it's a solid start time, and his driving's so good, he'll make up for it the rest of the way down the track.
34 hundredths up. Now we will see how Dukurs compares to the American Antoine here at the bottom part of the track. Will he extend on that lead? Yes, now up to 4/10.
See how clean he is. His body position hardly changes at all as he's going down, which is good for aerodynamics.
Martins Dukurs looking for yet another victory, has a track record of 48.58, bettering a 12.5-year mark set by Martin Reddle.
By 200ths of a second. I actually wouldn't have been surprised to see it be a couple tenths faster than that. We'll see if the track speeds up a little bit for the second run. We may see a repeat.
The great just keep getting greater in this sport. The record wasn't at the start where he was still 12 hundredths off, but this man has been brilliant from top to bottom over the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's an amazing on every track in the world. You know, most athletes will be stronger on certain styles of tracks. He's been strong on every track. I think he had 1 second place last year and won every other race.
Dukurs' Latvian older brother, Tomas Dukurs, 32 years old, also originally from Riga, now in Sigulda. Also a very good starter, not quite in the Tretiakov Martins Dukurs category. Third fastest start, 1/10 of a second off of his brother's pace. No, you have not had a lot of opportunity to go out on the world circuit over the last 4 or 5 years, but you've seen the races here. Is there a way to pinpoint what Martins does better than anyone?
You know, he's just smooth. You watch him everywhere. Nothing is rushed. Nothing's hurried. He's never reacting. He's always handling things up front, so he's not having to make last-second adjustments. You don't see him steering with his toes. His form's good. He just does everything well. He has a good start. And he's been sliding for a lot of years. This is a sport that requires a lot of years of experience to get the little subtle driving techniques that really separate the good from the really good.
5 hundredths behind American Matt Antoine as Tomas Dukurs is in third place. His brother Martins still leading, what else is new, by a pretty wide margin over the rest of the field, with just probably a couple of others left to try to contend for the top 5.
Well, next is Tretiakov, and he will have the fastest start of the day, almost for sure. And this is a track that puts a premium on it. Also, the Russians were here training earlier in the season, doing some lower level races a couple weeks ago. So he got a good bit of preseason training on the track here already this year.
A little later on, we'll see Elena Nikitina, the Russian rocket, who has been setting start records in the early going here in the women's race. Now let's keep an eye on this start record mark, 4.49. The track record fell about 3 minutes ago. Now will the start record fall? What great leg turnover.
Great turnover, good technique too. You see him running parallel to the sled, right alongside the sled, as opposed to sort of out wide away from the sled. A little early bump there on 3. Good line through 5. Decent setup into 6. He had some trouble here 2 weeks ago. Lost time there to his teammate.
And here he will fall back. That's not a big surprise, but keep an eye on those split times. Will he keep it close?
Little brush and skid there.
Now
it's gonna be close to medal position. I think he'll hold on to second spot, but not by much.
the Latvian Dukurs and the Russian Tretiakov could challenge 1-2 the whole season. They are clearly in a class by themselves right now, and they sit in that position through the first 10 sleds. Matt Antoine in third. Wasn't a start record, and maybe while cold temperatures lead to a fast track, it's a little tough to get started in this weather.
It makes it harder to warm up, makes it harder to perform at a high level there. Here you see him really high in the end of that turn, which shot him across to the wall on the other side of the track there. One of the several spots he had some issues on the way down.
The first seed has completed action. These are the top 10 from last week. They got into the first seed here in the second week. Look at the standings with Dukurs with a safe advantage over Tretiakov. The American Matt Antoine in third. When we return, German Frank Rommel will take to the track.
For those young fans down there locally, we ask that you please refrain from leaning on or over that handrail down there. Please stay out of the track surface at all times. As fun as it is, please refrain from throwing snowballs.
So we've got some emails and tweets coming in. USA Bobsled actually go Matt Antoine with a bunch of big exclamation points. So you know they're pretty pleased with the performance of that American. Another American, Kyle Tress, coming up a little later, tweets in that these are the days I question the sanity of standing outside in minus 23 degrees centigrade weather in a Lycra speed suit. Well put, Kyle, and he will be coming up in a little bit of time.
Not only is it in a Lycra speed suit, but you don't wear long johns underneath. So it's not a lot between you and the weather.
But you got to give credit to this crowd. Some of the school groups have been let out to come watch skeleton. What's the over-under and the number of sleds they're going to stick around for?
Yeah, hopefully they'll stick around for at least for the ladies' run. Schools here only have a half day on Friday so that they can kids can go out and train in winter sports like skiing, and hopefully when some of those kids are a little older in bobsled and skeleton.
So a little bit more about that track record. 13-year-old track record by Martin Rettel standing by here. And what is left for Martin Dukurs to do? There is one very significant thing at the end of the season.
Yep, it will be the games in Sochi, and it'll be interesting because he's got to be the favorite, but Tretiakov will have home track advantage there. So, you know, it'll be an interesting battle there, and there's certainly any number of other guys in the top 10 who could contend with them.
As exciting as it was for the North American fans to see John Montgomery win that gold in Whistler, as we return back here and get set for Frank Rommel, Martin Dukurs is giving that away in the fourth run at the Olympics. It was a little tough to see from a guy who was clearly the class of the field that year. Next up, Frank Rommel. This is the man who actually stopped Dukurs' winning streak at 13 last season with a victory over in Europe. But off to a slow start so far, and not one of the, speaking of starters, not one of the fastest here in the first 50 meters.
No, but a good veteran driver. He's been around for a long time. Consistently in the top 10 in the World Cup overall, often in the top 3 overall. A little early onto curve 3 there. Sets him up for a little too early into turn 4.
Rommel, 29 years old, from Eisenach, Germany. Very popular on the tour. Nice guy. Really struggling.
Little skid there. Yeah, he was driving a lot at the top of the track, even though he wasn't using his toes. I could see his feet moving up and down, which often is an indication that the athletes are steering with their legs. bump there.
Around the finish curve, the German in 6th place, so not a bad lower part of the course. He was threatening to fall back to 9th or 10th based on his early times.
And not a great start, and then you combine that with some trouble up at the top of the track. He just didn't have enough speed at the bottom to make up for it.
Down the middle.
It's a nice exit there. That's a spot where Tretiakov had some trouble on the right side. A little bit of a brush with the right wall there.
Rommel through. The Germans are in a fight to even qualify for the Olympics. Only two, all the competitors will need at least 2 top 3s. It's a tall order. This is Lucas Kuma from the once proud skeleton nation of Switzerland. A nation that's been really trying to get its footing back on the ice.
They've had a strong program in the past, but yeah, it's one of those things right now. They've got some younger athletes and trying to develop them into top 5 athletes. Really high there on turn 6. He's having some trouble here on the middle of the track.
We know on a snowy day and on a warm day, it's a foregone conclusion the ice will break down later in the first heat. Is that less of an issue on a day like today?
It is. That's the nice thing about this cold weather, is the ice will stay pretty consistent through, certainly through the heat, and from one heat to the next as well.
Speed is almost 5 miles an hour slower than Dukurs here in the bottom part of the track for the Swiss slider. Minutes, I keep extending these times, 1.16 seconds back. It feels like a minute when you're trying to compete against Dukurs.
Yeah, and it might as well be, you know, on a track where a lot of the races are won by a couple hundredths of a second. A full second is pretty significant.
So Coomer making his way down. We're going to say goodbye for the time being to Lincoln DeWitt. The World Cup champion will join us a little later on for the live coverage of the second runs of men's and women's skeleton. Continuing on with the competition with our next skeleton slider at the top from Austria, Raphael Maier, 13th place last week in Calgary. Yelling in the background is Martin Rettel. Is he yelling because his track record, 12 years old, has just been better? No, he's yelling to cheer on his athlete, Maier, with a start time of 4:91, the slowest of the 13 that have made their way down the track so far. Great sounds of these sleds. The Park City track, one of the shortest in the world, maybe the shortest. And as Lincoln was saying, perhaps the second fastest, so it's an interesting paradox. Very similar to the Le Plan track. It was built for the '92 Olympics. 7,700 back, 11th place, faster than one Canadian and Swiss athlete, but for the time being, he will try to stay in the top 14, 15 based on what unfolds behind him. Only the top 20 will make their way into run number 2. Maier bouncing on the ice a little bit as he makes his way to the near wall. Down to the middle of the lower track, you'll see some tapping. That won't affect the time as much as it does with the mistakes near the top. Sergey Chudinov from Russia slides for so many years in the shadow of Alexander Tretiakov, but Chudinov has had some great results over the years and a pair of World Cup medals on different tracks. Start time of 4:71, the 4th fastest of the 15 that have come down. Chudinov, 30 years old, from Moscow. On the World Cup circuit, athletes tend to intermingle quite a bit with one another, but the Russian team tends to stay together. And they're all very tight, and certainly they have helped each other rise to the top of this sport. Looking at what could be a top 7 at this point, which will be a decidedly better result than a week ago for the Russian across the finish line in 4th place. So a tremendous lower part of the track for Chudinov. Very interested to see how those split times compare to Tretiakov on that part of the track. Tretiakov, of course, with the much faster start. This was a 4:71 start, exactly the same start time as Tomas Dukurs, who sits 200ths behind him in 5th place in the standings. So all things between that duo were equal, and it is a Latvian-Russian show right now in the standings, with Latvia 1 through 5 is Latvia, Russia, USA, Russia, Latvia. Now Kristan Bromley, the veteran in his final season of an illustrious career, 41 years old, from Sheffield. Dr. Ice has won World Cup titles, World Championships, European Championships, and is sliding his way to a final Olympics later this year in Sochi. The 20-year veteran of the World Cup with a 4:88 start, 14th out of the 15 that have come down. Kristan was telling me he really likes that track in Sochi. He doesn't mind the warm weather because the track workers do a great job to keep the thing in top shape. He was also appreciative of the fact that they had lots of training opportunities in Sochi, which was only a subtle bar of it, a lack of training. The athletes felt they had the Whistler. Holding within 7/10 right here and doing a lot of correcting in that straightaway before the final few curves. Around the finish in 11th place, 49.29. Everyone is hoping for good things this year for Kristan Bromley, but the question that has to be lingering is he getting a little too old to compete amongst the top 6 or 7? That'll be interesting to see, especially as the tour makes its way to more familiar tracks to Kristan in Winterberg and San Moritz. A lot of correcting with both the body and the feet in that long straightaway before the finish curve. John Daly, the American, with a very fast start, had some good training times. 27 years old, out of Smithtown, Long Island, New York. Let's check out this start time. The 6th fastest at a 4:74. Daly has had a lot of recent top 6s in North America and around the world over the top couple of years, but no podium finishes. He was telling me before the season that that's the first goal. Get on the podium at one of these races. Then the confidence will only build, and he's having a good run here. Stays off of the wall in that straightaway, only a 1/4 second back at the last split. The American doing some dragging though at this point, now 4/10 back. High on that curve, the shades have been put up despite the cold temperature, the sun is beating down. John Daly from the United States, will it be a top 6? No, losing all sorts of time down at the bottom. Very disappointing for the American. His home track is Lake Placid, where they will be next week, but I'm sure he was expecting better things here. And the top half of this run looked like it would be a top 5 or 6. His head is high, losing some aerodynamic time at this point, but the form is pretty straight. So a bit of a perplexing bottom part of this as he hits off of this wall. 78 miles an hour, that generally doesn't cost you that much time, just a few bumps and bruises. And so we have something happening here at the top. The athlete perhaps forgot his shield. Now, once the track is clear, they have 30 seconds in which to try to get back. And he forgot his start bid. This happened last year to an American. May have been John Daly, actually, who just went. It's Ireland's Sean Greenwood. Does make it in time. 17th fastest start of the 17 that have gone down. In fact, it's almost 2/10 lower than the rest of them, so he will be hard-pressed to not be in last place at this point. Sean Greenwood, 26 years old, from West Vancouver, as we were talking to last week, as we were talking about. Not a lot of depth in the Irish program over the years, but a fair amount of success right here in Park City. In 2002 at the Olympic Games, Lord Clifton Wriothesley was in second or third place after the first run, ended up just out of the medals, as Greenwood does some serious steering down at the bottom, crossing in 16th place, only the Swiss slider Kugler behind him. 1.02 seconds off the pace for Greenwood. 27 sleds in the field today for the men's skeleton competition. Again, you can tweet us at Bob Skelly TV, Skelly, S-K-E-L-E, at Bob Skelly TV. And our email address is bobskellytv@gmail.com.
The track is now clear at the skeleton start for Alexander Kröckel.
Alexander Kröckel, one of those three Germans trying to make their way onto the Olympic team. Kröckel was second in this race last year. Not off to a great start this year with an 18th place last week in Calgary, but maybe this is a track he is much more comfortable with. Start time of 4:91 will not be a good way to get a medal contending run going. As I mentioned, the story with the Germans, very stringent World Olympic qualifying rules for the nation. They must have 2 top 3 finishes. Far from a sure thing, especially in skeleton. As Anja Huber told me, in Germany, it's medals or nothing. So they only look to send the best there. It's not about the Olympic experience. Through the straightaway to the shrieks of the school crowd here down at the finish. Not a bad time. 49.07, 8th place for Kröckel. So the Germans are still quite a bit away from the top 3s that they will need to qualify for the Olympics. They sit in 7th, 8th, and 11th place right now. And to be fair, they've relaxed a little bit those Olympic qualifying. They can have 3 top 6 finishes or 2 top 3s. But really, they haven't been knocking on the door yet so far in the early going here in North America. 98, early 99. Before the case, it certainly hasn't been recently. On finish curve now. In 20th place, 1.29. Only nod his approval, maybe just at the progress of his young athlete. Farrow actually not that young, although somewhat new to the World Cup at 31 years old, out of Sydney. And you have to give a lot of credit on this day to the track workers, to our cameramen, to all of the volunteers that are standing out there in these conditions to put on a World Cup race. Pascal Oswald, 21st last week in Calgary for the second competitor from Switzerland. Oswald, like so many of them, train on their home track in San Moritz, a track which is just being completed this week and next week, the natural track. So their early season practice needs to be in Innsbruck and around Europe. Start time for Oswald, 20th fastest, 5:08. So again, the story within the story. No one will catch the top 3 at this point, but it's all about the top 20 for these sliders in the 3rd seed, trying to earn a second run. It's always a little bit emotionally tough if you spend all week traveling, training, eating in the hotel room, and then you do not qualify for a second heat. Oswald right now trying to be within 1.16 seconds down at the bottom to be in the top 20, and he's nowhere close. Skidding and sliding his way down. Actually not bad on that last straightaway, but all of his speed was lost as he comes in at 21st place, 1.83. Such great tradition in the nation of Switzerland, as we were alluding to earlier. 3 Olympic medals, 2 by the great Gregor Stahli, the 3-time world champion, as well as Olympic gold in 2006 by Maja Pedersen. Hello to Maja and Snorre if you're watching today in Norway. Send us an email. Tell us what you think so far of the action. As we check out the one-handed start. As Lincoln was saying, the Canadians back in the early 21st century, Jeff Payne, Duff Gibson, they were revolutionizing this. Kristan Bromley adapted it in 2003 and won a World Cup title that year. And a little mystified at being in 21st and done for the day. Okay, Kyle Tress up. He tweeted us earlier saying it's a little too cold to be in a speed suit. Let's see if he can improve upon last week's disappointing 22nd place finish. A 4:89 start for the American, originally from Ewing, New Jersey, who now lives in Lake Placid, upstate New York, not far from Montreal. Half second back. Tress had one top 5 finish last year in the World Cup. That was in Lake Placid, a 5th place. He was 20th here in Park City. It just makes you realize as he has some problems here in the middle part of the track, how track specific this sport is to some athletes. So around the finish in 17th place, looking at the remaining competitors, Tress probably will get a second run. Probably should hang into the top 20, which he didn't do last week, but during that second heat, we'll certainly talk with Lincoln about what might be wrong in the early going for Kyle Tress, whom big things have been expected of, or even more importantly, are there other Americans maybe waiting in the wings, licking their chops for the possibility to get onto the World Cup? I'm not even sure what the USA protocol is on that. 5 now remaining, and another athlete who was very disappointing, surprisingly so, in the World Cup opener last week in Calgary, Ben Sandford. 23rd place without a second run for Sandford. And this is a guy who was really coming on last year. I mean, he's had some good results, especially in Calgary and North America in years past. But last year, I don't have the I'll look this up in a second, but Sandford had a lot of top 10 finishes. Yeah, an 8th place, a 9th place, a 7th, an 8th, and 10th. In fact, he was top 10 in every race he competed in the World Cup last year. Start time. Well, that's, you know, maybe he's coming back from an injury. I did hear some allusion to that, but we saw him after the run last week, and he wasn't using the injury as an excuse. He was just disappointed with the performance. 6,700 back. So really the question will be what's wrong with Ben Sandford at this point. His uncle Bruce, a world champion in this sport, about 20 years ago now. Great sound of that sled, that face max, the feet. Down now on the straightaway to the finish curve. Will Ben Sandford qualify this week for a second run? Hitting the finish in 20th place exactly, 1.09 back. Ed Smith of Great Britain still to come. Hey, there's Terry Holland. Good to see Terry back. Terry was coaching the Australians for many years, working with New Zealand now as well. Former World Cup medalist for the United States. Ed Smith of Great Britain still to come. Under Mirambell, who, at least to his credit, has had a few top 20s in the last year or two, plugging away, so he could get there, but right now Ben Sandford sitting on the bubble. He is one of the taller athletes on the circuit, maybe the tallest in men's skeleton. And still very disappointed with how he's performing. Yuki Sasahara, 24th place last week. Will be a top 12 start time. 20th, so disappointing in the first 50 meters. Sasahara, 29 years old, from Nagano. Nagano was the site of the 1998 Olympic Games. Unlike some of the tracks built for the Olympics, Nagano has not been a dinosaur. It stayed active, although it has just been a hard-pressed spot, too remote to lure World Cup races that often. The skeleton athletes have been there twice in the last 10 years, including the 2003 World Championship. But they do run youth programs, national programs on that track outside of the city of Nagano at Izuna Kogen. Straightaway with some steering into the finish curve. Here comes Sasahara, 19th place, bumping Ben Sandford out of the second run. So for the Kiwi competitor, another disappointing day. And Sasahara and Greenwood of Ireland now sitting in 20th place. Those are the two on the bubble with 3 remaining. So we see the snow flying off of that screen. Sasahara will have a second run, I am predicting, with just the 3 remaining. Maurizio Olio, coached by Donnie Lacate back there on the left. Lacate had some top 5-6 finishes during her career on the women's circuit. Tweet, a little delayed tweet comes into us from @SwiftSlider. David Swift tells us, so in World Cup Park City today, I'm pretty sure a track record is about to get blown to smithereens. If you're referring to the skeleton, David, that did in fact happen. The track record was beaten. That was blown to smithereens. It was beaten by 200s. But we still have 3 races ahead, and some more track records could fall. The Italian at the latest split now 59 hundredths back. Trying to stay within about a second of the lead by Martin's Dukurs to qualify for run number 2. Directly following the men's skeleton, we will have women's skeleton action. It probably will be about 20 minutes break between the 2 races. As Olio crosses 24th place, 50.01. Following this race, we got women's skeleton. Some storylines to keep an eye on in the women's skeleton. Will the British continue to do well? Lizzie Yarnold was expected to do well, and sure enough, she did with a victory in the opening races. You see some excitement there for the Italian. And the bigger story for the North Americans, Noelle Pikus-Pace, who looked very impressive last week in putting down the best 2-run time, was ultimately disqualified from the race. And can she emotionally and physically put it back on track on her home track? Here's Under Mirambell, one of the more popular athletes on tour, always good for a smile in the start house. The Spaniard finished 25th last week out of 26 competitors. 490 start. Mirambell is one man.